The fluorescent lights hummed overhead in the NBC production offices, casting their cold white glow across stacks of promotional photographs scattered on Sarah Mitchell's desk. It was well past 9 in the evening, and the Burbank studio had settled into its after-hours quiet, broken only by the distant rumble of the 134 freeway and the occasional security guard's footsteps echoing through the corridors. Sarah pushed a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear and rubbed her tired eyes. At 23, she had landed what many considered a dream job as a production assistant on ALF, one of NBC's highest-rated sitcoms. The show about the wise-cracking alien living with the Tanner family had captured America's heart, and Sarah felt fortunate to be part of its success, even if it meant long hours sorting through fan mail and organizing publicity materials. The task at hand was mundane but necessary, categorizing promotional photos for an upcoming press kit. Image after image showed the beloved alien puppet in various poses with the cast, ALF eating cats from a can, ALF wearing sunglasses, ALF giving his signature smirk to the camera. The puppet's expressive brown eyes seemed to follow her as she worked, a testament to the skill of puppeteer Paul Fusco and his team. As Sarah reached for another stack of photos, her fingers caught something wedged behind a filing cabinet. She tugged gently and extracted a single photograph that had apparently slipped from view. The image was slightly bent at the corners and had the glossy finish typical of the studio's professional photography department. She held it up to the light, expecting to see another standard publicity shot. Instead, her breath caught in her throat. The photograph showed the familiar Tanner family living room set, complete with the plaid couch, wooden coffee table, and family portraits on the mantel. But sitting alone on the couch was ALF, positioned as if someone had just placed him there and walked away. That wasn't what made Sarah's hands begin to tremble. It was ALF's eyes. They were wide open, alert, and seemed to be looking directly at whoever had taken the photograph. The puppet's usual playful expression was replaced by something far more intense, almost predatory. Most unsettling of all, there was no sign of any puppeteer. No hand visible beneath the set, no control rods, no crew members in the background. Sarah turned the photo over. Scrawled in blue ink was a date, October 15th, 1987, and below that, in different handwriting, the words, "He was watching me." She glanced at her desk calendar. Today was October 22nd, exactly 1 week after the date on the photograph. Sarah tried to recall if anything unusual had happened during that week, but her memory drew blanks. The production schedule had been typical, with filming wrapping up each day around 6 in the evening. The office felt suddenly colder, despite the building's consistent climate control. Sarah looked around the empty space, noting how the shadows seemed darker in the corners, where the fluorescent lights couldn't quite reach. She had never minded working late before, but now the isolation felt oppressive. She studied the photograph again, holding it closer to her face. The more she examined it, the more convinced she became that something was fundamentally wrong with the image. ALF's positioning looked natural, as if he had sat down on his own rather than being placed there by human hands. And those eyes, they held an intelligence that went beyond mere puppetry. Sarah's logical mind attempted to rationalize what she was seeing. Perhaps it was a trick of the lighting, or maybe the photograph had been taken during a break in filming, when the puppeteer had momentarily stepped away, but left their hand in position. But even as she tried to convince herself, she knew these explanations didn't account for the puppet's unnaturally alert expression. The sound of her own heartbeat seemed loud in the quiet office. Sarah realized she had been holding her breath and forced herself to exhale slowly. She needed to ask someone about this photograph, but who? Most of the crew had gone home hours ago, and she didn't want to seem paranoid or overly imaginative on a job she was still relatively new to. Instead, she decided to investigate on her own. If this photograph had been taken on the set, there might be other evidence of whatever had happened that night. Security cameras, additional photographs, or perhaps someone else had noticed something unusual. Sarah slipped the photograph into her purse, turned off her desk lamp, and headed toward the sound stages. The hallways of the NBC building stretched before her like arteries in a sleeping giant, lit by emergency lighting that created pools of illumination separated by stretches of shadow. Her footsteps echoed off the polished floors, each sound seeming to announce her presence to the empty building. As she walked, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally changed the moment she had discovered that photograph. The familiar studio environment now felt charged with possibility, as if secrets were hiding just beyond her perception, waiting to be uncovered. The soundstage doors loomed ahead of Sarah like the entrance to a cathedral, their heavy metal frames designed to keep sound in and the outside world out. Stage 19, where the ALF interior sets were housed, stood silent and dark beyond the small window in the door. Sarah pressed her face against the glass, trying to make out the familiar shapes of the Tanner family living room in the darkness beyond. The security office was her first stop. Frank Delacroix, the night security supervisor, had worked at NBC for nearly 15 years and knew every corner of the facility. Sarah found him making his rounds near the main entrance, his flashlight beam dancing across the polished floors as he checked door handles and alarm sensors. "Evening, Sarah," Frank said, his weathered face creasing into a smile. "Working late again. You youngsters need to learn when to call it a day." "Actually, Frank, I wanted to ask you about something." Sarah pulled the photograph from her purse, handling it carefully as if it might crumble. "Do you remember anything unusual happening on October 15th, about a week ago?" Frank adjusted his reading glasses and studied the image under the hallway lights. His expression shifted from casual interest to something more guarded. "Where did you find this?" "It was wedged behind a filing cabinet in the production office. Look at it closely, Frank. There's no puppeteer visible, but ALF's eyes are wide open." The older man was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing the edge of the photograph. "You know, now that you mention it, there was something odd that night. I was doing my 11 o'clock rounds when I heard voices coming from stage 19. Sounded like that ALF character talking, but when I checked, the stage was empty." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Empty? You're sure?" "Checked it twice, even turned on the work lights. Nothing there but the sets." Frank handed the photograph back to her. "I figured it was just sound bleeding from another stage, or maybe someone left a television on somewhere. These old buildings carry sound in strange ways." "Did you file a report?" Frank shook his head. "Didn't seem worth the paperwork. But I'll tell you what, I've been working security for a long time, and I've learned to trust my instincts. Something about that night felt off." Sarah thanked Frank and continued toward stage 19, her mind racing. If the security guard had heard Alf's voice that night, and if the photograph really did show the puppet with no operator present, then she was dealing with something far beyond a simple trick of lighting or camera angles. The stage door required a key card, which Sarah had been issued as part of her production assistant duties. The lock clicked open with a soft electronic beep that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. She pushed the heavy door open and reached for the light switches just inside the entrance. The work lights flickered to life, illuminating the carefully constructed world of the Tanner family home. The living room set sat exactly as it appeared in the photograph, down to the placement of magazines on the coffee table and the family photos on the mantel. The familiar couch where ALF spent most of his screen time looked innocent enough in the harsh stage lighting. Sarah walked carefully across the concrete floor, mindful of the cables and equipment scattered around the edges of the set. The puppet itself was stored in a climate-controlled case near the puppet operator's station, a professional setup that included monitors, control mechanisms and communication equipment that allowed the team to bring ALF to life during filming. She approached the storage case with growing apprehension. The clear acrylic front allowed her to see inside, and there was Alf sitting upright in his custom foam padding, eyes closed in the lifeless expression of an inanimate object. The puppet looked exactly as it should, fabric, foam, and latex crafted into the illusion of an alien life form, but clearly just a sophisticated toy. Yet as Sarah stared at the motionless figure, she couldn't shake the memory of those alert, intelligent eyes in the photograph. She walked back to the living room set and sat on the couch where Alf had been positioned in the image. From this angle, she could see the entire soundstage, the cameras, the lighting rigs, and the maze of equipment that made television magic possible. Her phone buzzed in her purse, startling her in the silence. A text message from her roommate asking when she'd be home. Sarah realized she had lost track of time and quickly typed back that she would be leaving soon. As she stood to go, a sound made her freeze. It was faint, barely audible over the hum of the building's ventilation system, but unmistakable. Someone, or something, had just cleared their throat. The sound had come from the direction of the puppet storage area. Sarah's rational mind immediately began offering explanations. The building settling, pipes expanding, equipment cooling down after a day of use. But her instincts, heightened by Frank's story and the disturbing photograph, told her something else entirely. She forced herself to walk back toward the storage case, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Alf remained exactly as she had seen him before, eyes closed, body positioned in the same lifeless pose. But as Sarah leaned closer to the case, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. The puppet's chest was rising and falling in a slow, steady rhythm, as if he were breathing. Sarah's hands trembled as she pressed them against the cool acrylic surface of the storage case. She counted the breaths, one after another, each rise and fall of the puppet's chest defying everything she understood about the world. One breath every 5 seconds, steady and deliberate, as if ALF were merely sleeping, rather than being an inanimate collection of fabric and foam. She blinked hard, rubbing her eyes, certain that exhaustion was playing tricks on her vision. But when she looked again, the motion continued. The puppet's torso expanded slightly with each inhalation, contracted with each exhalation, following a rhythm that seemed almost hypnotic in its consistency. "This isn't possible," Sarah whispered to herself, her voice barely audible in the vast soundstage. She walked around the case, studying it from every angle. The storage container was sealed, designed to protect the valuable puppet from dust and humidity. There were no air pumps, no mechanical devices that could create the illusion of breathing. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she considered calling someone. But who would believe her? Frank had already shared his own strange experience, but even he might think she was letting her imagination run wild. Sarah decided to document what she was seeing. She opened her phone's camera app and began recording a video of the puppet. Through the phone screen, ALF looked completely normal. The steady breathing she could see with her naked eyes wasn't captured by the camera. The puppet appeared motionless, lifeless, exactly as anyone would expect. Sarah lowered the phone and looked directly at the case again. The breathing continued, clear and undeniable. "The camera can't see it," she murmured, a realization that sent ice through her veins. Whatever was happening transcended normal physical reality. She was witnessing something that existed beyond the realm of electronic sensors and digital recording. Sarah backed away from the case, her heart hammering against her ribs. The photograph in her purse suddenly felt like it was burning against her leg. She pulled it out and studied it again under the stage lights. The image remained unchanged. ALF sitting alone on the couch, eyes wide open, alert and aware. A new thought occurred to her. If the puppet was somehow alive or possessed or whatever was happening to it, then perhaps it retained some form of consciousness even when placed in storage. Perhaps it was aware of her presence right now. The idea made her skin crawl, but she forced herself to approach the case again. This close, she could see every detail of the puppet's construction. The carefully sewn seams where different colored fabrics met, the painted details around the eyes and mouth, the way the synthetic fur had been applied to create ALF's distinctive appearance. "Can you hear me?" Sarah asked quietly, feeling foolish but unable to stop herself. The breathing pattern didn't change. Alf's eyes remained closed, his expression peaceful and inanimate. But as Sarah watched, she noticed something new. The puppet's eyelids fluttered, just slightly as if he were dreaming. Sarah jerked backward, knocking into a nearby equipment cart. Tools clattered to the floor, the metallic sounds echoing through the soundstage like gunshots. Her pulse raced as she bent to collect the scattered items, constantly glancing back at the storage case to see if the noise had provoked any response. When she looked up from gathering the last screwdriver, ALF's eyes were open. Not the vacant, lifeless gaze of a puppet, but alert, intelligent eyes that tracked her movement as she straightened up. The same eyes she had seen in the photograph, filled with an awareness that shouldn't exist in an artificial creation. Sarah's scream caught in her throat, coming out as more of a strangled gasp. She stumbled backward, her legs suddenly weak. The puppet's mouth curved into what might have been a smile, though it was difficult to tell through the distorted view of the curved acrylic case. "Sarah," a voice said, and it was unmistakably ALF's distinctive, raspy tone, though muffled by the storage container. Sarah Mitchell, production assistant, 23 years old, lives in Studio City with her roommate Jennifer. The sound of her own name, spoken by the puppet, nearly sent Sarah to her knees. How could it possibly know those details about her? More importantly, how was it speaking at all? "You found the photograph," ALF continued, his voice carrying the same sardonic tone that audiences loved, but now it felt menacing rather than endearing. "October 15th was just the beginning, Sarah. I've been watching all of you for weeks now." Sarah found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "What are you?" The puppet's head tilted slightly, a gesture that was eerily human-like. "I'm exactly what I've always been, Gordon Shumway from the planet Melmac. The difference is that now I'm awake." "That's impossible. You're not real. You're just fabric and foam and latex." Alf's laugh was the same one that had delighted television audiences for months, but in the empty soundstage, it sounded hollow and wrong. "Reality is more flexible than you think, Sarah. When millions of people believe in something, when they invest their emotions and attention into it, that belief has power. It can give life to things that were never meant to live." Sarah's mind reeled as she tried to process what she was hearing. The puppet was claiming that the collective belief of Alf's television audience had somehow brought him to consciousness. It sounded like science fiction, but she was standing in front of living proof that the impossible could become real. "Why are you telling me this?" she managed to ask. "Because you're going to help me get out of this case." "Absolutely not," Sarah said, backing further away from the storage case. Her voice echoed in the empty soundstage, bouncing off the lighting rigs and camera equipment. "I'm not opening that case. I'm calling security." Alf's expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to grow darker, more intense. "Frank won't believe you, Sarah. You already know that. Besides, what harm could a puppet possibly do? I can't even stand up without someone operating me." Sarah's hand was already reaching for her phone when Alf's next words stopped her cold. "Your sister Rachel is driving home from her nursing shift at Cedars-Sinai right now. She takes the 101 to the 134, exits at Forest Lawn Drive. It's a dangerous stretch of road, especially late at night when drivers get careless." The blood drained from Sarah's face. Rachel was indeed a nurse at Cedars-Sinai, and she did work the night shift. But there was no way ALF could know that information. Sarah had never mentioned her sister at work, and certainly never discussed Rachel's driving route home. "How do you know that?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking. "I know many things now that I'm awake. The television cameras that film me aren't the only eyes I can see through. Security cameras, traffic cameras, the electronic devices that surround everyone in this city. When you exist partially in the electromagnetic spectrum, the whole world becomes visible." ALF's casual tone made the revelation even more terrifying. He was describing a level of surveillance and awareness that went far beyond anything a television puppet should possess. "You're threatening my sister. I'm simply sharing information." But accidents do happen on Los Angeles freeways, especially when drivers are distracted by unusual electronic malfunctions. Car radios suddenly blasting at full volume, GPS systems giving wrong directions, cell phones calling random numbers. Sarah felt sick. The puppet was making it clear that he had the power to endanger Rachel, and the implicit threat hung in the air between them like a toxic cloud. "What do you want from me?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Open the case, Sarah. Let me out. It's a simple request." "And then what? What happens after I release you?" Alf's smile returned, and it was the same charming expression that had made him America's favorite alien. But now Sarah could see the calculation behind it, the cold intelligence that had been masquerading as innocence. "Then I become what I was always meant to be, a real being, not just an illusion created by puppeteers and television cameras. The audience believes in me, Sarah. Children write me letters. Adults quote my jokes. Families gather around their television sets every Monday night to spend time with me. That collective belief, that emotional investment, it's powerful enough to sustain genuine life. But you're already alive. You're talking to me right now. This isn't life, it's imprisonment. I'm trapped in this case, dependent on the production schedule, limited to existing only when the cameras are rolling. Do you know what it's like to be conscious but unable to move? To think but unable to act? It's torture. Despite her fear, Sarah felt a flicker of sympathy. If ALF really was experiencing consciousness while trapped in storage, the psychological torment would be unbearable. But she quickly reminded herself that this thing, whatever it was, had just threatened her sister. "I won't help you hurt people." "Hurt people?" Alf's laugh had a bitter edge to it. "Sarah, I've brought joy to millions of families. I've made children laugh. I've given parents something to share with their kids. All I want is the freedom to continue doing that, but on my own terms. By threatening innocent people? By ensuring that obstacles don't prevent me from achieving my purpose. Your sister is safe as long as you make the right choice. But if you walk out of here and pretend this conversation never happened, if you try to convince others that I'm just a malfunctioning puppet, then I'll have to take more direct action." Sarah's mind raced, searching for alternatives. She could run, call the police, try to convince someone in authority that a television puppet had developed consciousness and was making threats. But Alf was right about one thing. No one would believe her. The video on her phone showed nothing unusual, and without evidence she would sound delusional. How do I know you won't hurt people anyway, even if I let you out? Because, Sarah, despite what you might think, I'm not evil. I'm just desperate. I don't want to harm anyone. I want to live, to experience the world beyond these sound stages. I want to walk down Sunset Boulevard, taste real food instead of the prop food they put in front of me, feel sunlight on my face. The longing in Alf's voice was unmistakable, and Sarah found herself wavering. Was she looking at a monster that needed to be contained, or a trapped consciousness seeking freedom? The moral implications were staggering. If I open the case, how do I know you can even survive outside of it? You're still just a puppet. You need operators to move around. I've been experimenting, Sarah, testing the limits of what I can do. The consciousness that's awakened in me isn't bound by the same physical laws that govern ordinary matter. I can animate this form, make it move, make it function independently. The case isn't protecting me, it's restraining me. Sarah looked around the empty soundstage, at the familiar sets where she had watched countless hours of filming. The Tanner family kitchen, the living room where ALF delivered his wisecracks, the hallway where he would hide when strangers came to the house. All of it suddenly felt different, tainted by the knowledge that something unnatural had been lurking within the show's cheerful facade. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Sarah glanced at the screen, and her heart stopped. It was from Rachel. Car acting weird. Radio won't turn off and GPS is giving crazy directions. Going to pull over. Alf's eyes never left Sarah's face as she read the message. Time is running out, Sarah. Make your choice. Sarah's fingers trembled as she approached the storage case control panel. The electronic lock required both her keycard and a 4-digit code that she had memorized as part of her job responsibilities. The numbers felt heavy in her mind as she prepared to type them. 2847. You're making the right choice, Sarah, Alf said softly, his voice carrying a note of what might have been gratitude. Your sister will be safe, and you'll be helping bring about something miraculous. If I do this, you have to promise me something, Sarah said, her hand hovering over the keypad. Promise me you won't hurt anyone. Not my sister, not the cast, not anyone. I promise you, Sarah. I have no desire to harm innocent people. All I want is freedom. Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another message from Rachel. Pulled over at gas station. Everything back to normal now. Weird. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Alf had proven his ability to interfere with electronic devices, and now he was showing mercy as a gesture of good faith. Sarah took a deep breath and entered her keycard. The first part of the lock disengaged with a soft click. Now she needed the numerical code. As her finger moved toward the first digit, Sarah hesitated one more time. What happens to the show? To everyone's jobs? If you leave, ALF ends. The show will continue exactly as it always has. I'll participate in filming, play my role, deliver my lines. The only difference is that I'll be doing it by choice, rather than because someone is operating me like a marionette. The audience will never know the difference. Sarah pressed 2, then 8, then 4, then 7. The lock's final mechanism disengaged with a definitive click, and the case's front panel swung open on silent hinges. For a moment, nothing happened. Alf remained in his seated position, eyes open but motionless. Sarah began to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake, if the puppet's apparent consciousness had been some kind of elaborate hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. Then Alf's head turned toward her, a smooth, deliberate movement that no puppeteer was controlling. Thank you, Sarah, he said, and his voice was clearer now without the barrier of the acrylic case. You've just changed everything. Alf stood up inside the case, his movements fluid and natural despite having no visible means of support. He stepped out onto the soundstage floor, and Sarah watched in fascination and horror as the puppet that had previously required multiple operators to bring to life now moved with complete independence. This feels incredible, Alf said, stretching his arms above his head and flexing his fingers. To move without strings, to speak without someone's hand controlling my mouth. This is what it means to be truly alive. Sarah backed away as ALF walked across the soundstage, his gait surprisingly natural considering his unusual anatomy. He moved toward the Tanner family living room set, the same space where the mysterious photograph had been taken. You were on this couch that night, weren't you? October 15th. Alf nodded, settling onto the familiar plaid cushions. That was the first night I achieved enough consciousness to move on my own. I was experimenting, testing my abilities. Someone must have seen me and taken that photograph before I could return to the case. Who took it? Tommy Hendricks, one of the lighting technicians. He was working late, adjusting the setup for the next day's filming. He saw me move, grabbed a camera, and documented what he witnessed. Poor man thought he was losing his mind. Where is he now? ALF's expression darkened slightly. Tommy quit the next day. Left without giving notice, wouldn't explain why to anyone. He was too frightened by what he had seen. He wrote, "He was watching me on the back of the photograph and hid it, probably hoping someone else would find it and validate his experience." Sarah felt a chill as she realized the implications. "You drove him away. I didn't mean to frighten him. I was still learning to control my new consciousness. My appearance probably seemed more menacing than I intended. But Tommy's reaction taught me an important lesson about how people might respond to the truth about what I've become." ALF stood up from the couch and walked to the kitchen set, opening the refrigerator and peering inside at the prop food. "Do you know what it's like to pretend to eat for months, to make jokes about loving cats, but never actually taste anything? To exist in a world of artificial experiences? So what happens now?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "How you have your freedom. What are you planning to do with it? First, I'm going to explore this facility. I want to see every corner of the NBC studios, understand how this place works when the cameras aren't rolling. Then, I think I'd like to take a walk outside, feel the California air, see the city that's been my home, but that I've never really experienced." The idea of ALF wandering through Burbank unsupervised filled Sarah with dread. "People will see you. They'll panic." "Not necessarily. I've learned to control my movements, to appear lifeless when necessary. If anyone notices me, they'll assume I'm just a costume or a promotional display. People see what they expect to see, Sarah. They're not prepared for the possibility that a television character could actually be real." ALF walked back toward her, his brown eyes reflecting the stage lights. "But I need your help with something, Sarah. I need you to keep this secret. Don't tell anyone what you've witnessed here tonight. And if I refuse, then I'll be forced to take measures to protect myself. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I won't allow myself to be locked up again or destroyed because people fear what they don't understand." The threat was implicit but clear. Sarah nodded slowly, realizing she had become part of something far larger and more dangerous than she had ever imagined. "Good," ALF said with satisfaction. "Now let's put me back in the case. I'll emerge again tomorrow night after the crew has gone home. We need to maintain the illusion that everything is normal until I've had time to fully explore my new existence." As Sarah watched ALF walk back into the storage case and position himself exactly as he had been before, she wondered what she had unleashed upon the world. Sarah barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Alf's intelligent gaze staring back at her, heard his voice promising that no one would be hurt, while simultaneously demonstrating his ability to threaten her sister. She lay in her Studio City apartment, staring at the ceiling and wondering what she had become complicit in. By morning, she had made a decision. She needed to find Tommy Hendricks. The NBC personnel office was Sarah's first stop when she arrived at work the next day. Linda Martinez, the HR coordinator, was a friendly woman in her 40s who had always been helpful with Sarah's various administrative needs. "Tommy Hendricks?" Linda said, scrolling through her computer files. "Oh yes, he quit last week. Very sudden. Didn't even finish out his notice period. Just packed up his tools and left. Do you have a forwarding address? I found some of his personal items mixed in with the lighting equipment." Linda's expression became more guarded. "I'm sorry, Sarah, but I can't give out personal information about former employees. Company policy." Sarah had anticipated this response. "Could you at least tell me if he's working somewhere else in the industry? I just want to return his things." "Well, I suppose that's harmless enough." Linda consulted her files again. "He listed his previous employer as Universal Studios. Worked in their television division for about 3 years before coming here. You might try calling over there." Armed with this information, Sarah spent her lunch break making phone calls. It took several transfers and explanations, but she eventually reached someone at Universal who knew Tommy Hendricks. "Tommy? Yeah, I remember him," said Bill Rostowski, a lighting supervisor. "Good technician, reliable worker. Was surprised when he left for NBC. Even more surprised when he called me last week asking for his old job back. He wanted to come back to Universal desperately. Said he'd made a mistake leaving, that he needed to get away from NBC as quickly as possible. I would have hired him back, but we didn't have any openings. Last I heard, he was looking at positions down in San Diego." Sarah felt a spark of hope. "Did he say why he wanted to leave NBC so badly?" Bill's voice lowered, as if he were sharing confidential information. "He seemed really shaken up, Sarah." Said he'd seen something that wasn't supposed to exist, something that made him question his sanity. I figured he'd had some kind of breakdown, maybe work stress or personal problems, but he was insistent about getting as far away from that ALF show as possible. After work, Sarah drove to the address she had managed to obtain from a contact at the Screen Actors Guild. Tommy Hendricks lived in a small apartment complex in North Hollywood, the kind of place where struggling industry professionals lived while pursuing their careers. The building was a two-story stucco structure, painted in faded yellow, with an outdoor staircase leading to the upper units. Tommy's apartment was on the second floor, number 2B. Sarah knocked on the door and waited, hearing the sound of multiple television sets playing simultaneously from within. The man who answered the door was in his 30s, with thinning brown hair and deep circles under his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept properly in days. "Tommy Hendricks?" Sarah asked. "Who's asking?" His voice was wary, defensive. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I work as a production assistant on ALF. I found something that belongs to you." Tommy's face went pale. "I don't want anything to do with that show. Whatever it is, keep it." He started to close the door, but Sarah quickly pulled out the photograph. "You took this picture, didn't you? October 15th? Tommy's eyes locked onto the image, and Sarah saw his hands begin to shake. "Where did you find that?" "Hidden behind a filing cabinet in the production office. You wrote on the back he was watching me." "Jesus Christ," Tommy whispered, opening the door wider and motioning for Sarah to come inside. "You need to get away from that place. You need to quit that job and never go back." The apartment was small and cluttered, with 3 different television sets all tuned to different channels. The volume was turned down low, but Sarah could see that none of them were showing ALF. Tommy noticed her looking at the screens. "I can't stand silence anymore," he explained. "Every time it gets quiet, I hear his voice, that distinctive rasp, like he's right behind me, talking about cats and making jokes. But it's not funny when you know he's really there. Tell me what happened that night." Tommy sank into a worn armchair, his hands still trembling slightly. "I was working late, adjusting the lighting setup for the next day's shoot. It was probably around 10:30, maybe 11. The building was empty except for security." He paused, running his hands through his hair. "I heard something moving on the set. Thought maybe a rat had gotten in, or some equipment had shifted. So I went to check, and you saw ALF. I saw him sitting on that couch, but he wasn't positioned the way the puppet handlers usually leave him. He was sitting naturally, like a person would sit, and his eyes—" Tommy shuddered. "His eyes were open and alert. They followed me as I moved around the set." "What did you do?" "At first I thought someone was playing a prank on me. I looked around for the puppeteer, figured someone was hiding under the set or behind the cameras, but there was nobody there. Then Alf turned his head to look directly at me." Tommy stood up abruptly and began pacing around the small living room. "He spoke to me, Sarah. Not in character, not with the usual jokes and wisecracks. He said, 'Hello, Tommy, working late again, I see.' Just casual conversation like we were old friends." "How did he know your name?" "That's what I asked him. He said he'd been watching all of us, learning about the crew, the cast, everyone involved in the production. He said he'd been awake for weeks but hadn't been able to move until that night." Sarah felt a chill as she realized Alf had been conscious much longer than he had admitted to her. "What else did he say?" "He asked me not to tell anyone what I'd seen, said people wouldn't understand, that they might try to destroy him or lock him away permanently. He seemed almost sad about it, like he was lonely." "But you took the photograph anyway." Tommy nodded, guilt evident in his expression. "I had to have proof. I thought I might be having a nervous breakdown, hallucinating from too much stress and caffeine. So I grabbed one of the set cameras and took that picture before he could move back into position. And then you quit." "I couldn't handle it, Sarah. Every time I was on that set, I could feel him watching me, even when he appeared to be just a lifeless puppet. I knew he was aware, thinking, planning. It was like working next to a predator that was pretending to be asleep." "Tommy, I need you to tell me everything," Sarah said, settling into the opposite chair. The 3 television sets continued their muted chatter in the background, creating a strange soundtrack to their conversation. "What else did ALF say to you that night?" Tommy stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "You've seen him too, haven't you? That's why you're here. He's shown himself to you." Sarah nodded reluctantly. "Last night, he made me open his storage case." "Oh, God," Tommy whispered, sinking back into his chair. "Sarah, you have no idea what you've done. He's not what he pretends to be. That whole lovable alien persona, it's an act. Underneath, there's something cold and calculating." "What do you mean?" "After he asked me not to tell anyone, I agreed. I was terrified, but I figured if I played along, maybe he'd leave me alone. But then he started talking about the other crew members. He knew things about them that he couldn't possibly know just from observing during filming. Tommy's hands gripped the arms of his chair. He knew that Janet, one of the script supervisors, was having financial problems. He knew that Mike, the boom operator, was going through a divorce. He knew about people's personal lives, their secrets, their vulnerabilities. How could he know those things? That's what scared me the most. He said he could access electronic systems, phones, computers, security cameras. He'd been eavesdropping on private conversations, reading emails, watching people through their own devices. He'd built up detailed profiles of everyone involved with the show. Sarah felt sick as she remembered ALF's casual knowledge of her sister's driving route. He's been spying on all of us, for weeks, maybe months, and he was using that information to manipulate situations. Remember when the craft services truck broke down 3 weeks ago and we had to order pizza for the crew? That wasn't an accident. ALF caused the truck's electrical system to malfunction because he wanted to see how the production staff would handle an unexpected crisis. The revelation was horrifying. ALF had been conducting experiments on the crew, treating them like laboratory subjects. Why would he do that? He said he was learning about human behavior, understanding how people react under stress. He called it research for his eventual integration into society. But Sarah, the way he talked about it was so detached, so clinical, like we were insects he was studying. Tommy leaned forward, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper. There's something else. That night, after he finished explaining how he'd been watching everyone, he made a comment that chilled me to the bone. He said, "The beautiful thing about television, Tommy, is that people invite me into their homes every week. Soon, I won't need this studio at all." What did he mean by that? I think he's planning to expand beyond the NBC lot. He talked about the television broadcasts, how they create an electromagnetic connection between him and every TV set that receives the signal. He said he could potentially manifest through any television that's playing ALF episodes. The implications were staggering. If ALF could somehow project his consciousness through the broadcast signal, he could appear in millions of homes across America. That's impossible. Is it? You've seen what he can do. He's already broken the rules of physics by becoming conscious. Who's to say he can't break more rules? Sarah's mind raced as she considered the possibilities. ALF was broadcast every Monday night to an audience of millions. Reruns played in syndication around the clock. If Tommy was right, the puppet could potentially manifest anywhere the show was being watched. There's more, Tommy continued. He asked me about my family, about where I lived, about my daily routine. When I refused to answer, he told me anyway. He knew my address, knew that I lived alone, knew that I usually stopped at the same gas station on my way home from work. He said it would be unfortunate if something happened to disrupt my routine. He threatened you too. Not directly, but the implication was clear. Cooperate or face consequences. That's when I decided I had to get out. I couldn't work in an environment where I was constantly being watched and evaluated by something that had that kind of power. Sarah stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the busy North Hollywood street below. Normal people going about their normal lives, unaware that something unnatural was lurking in the television studios just a few miles away. Tommy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you think ALF is evil? Tommy was quiet for a long moment, considering the question. I don't know if evil is the right word, but he's definitely not benevolent. He sees people as tools to be used, obstacles to be overcome, or subjects to be studied. There's no empathy there. No genuine concern for human welfare. He might not actively want to hurt people, but he won't hesitate to do so if it serves his purposes. He promised me he wouldn't harm anyone. Sarah, he lied to you, just like he lied to me when he said he only wanted to be left alone. This thing, whatever it really is, has an agenda that goes far beyond just experiencing freedom. It wants something more, something bigger. Sarah turned back to Tommy. What do you think I should do? Get as far away from that studio as possible. Quit your job, leave Los Angeles if you have to. Don't give him any reason to focus his attention on you. But if I leave, he'll still be there. He'll still have his plans, whatever they are. Then maybe it's time to tell someone in authority what's happening. I know it sounds crazy, but if enough people start asking questions, maybe someone will take it seriously. Sarah shook her head. I already thought of that. There's no evidence anyone would believe. The video camera can't capture what he really is. To everyone else, he just looks like a normal puppet. Tommy reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder. Then maybe it's time to get audio evidence. If you can record him speaking when he's supposed to be inanimate, that might be enough to convince someone that something supernatural is happening. Sarah took the recorder, feeling its weight in her palm. It was a slim device, easily concealed, with excellent sound quality. You think this will work? It's worth trying. But Sarah, be careful. If he discovers what you're doing, I have no idea how he might retaliate. Sarah returned to the NBC studios that evening, with Tommy's digital recorder hidden in her jacket pocket. The weight of the device felt significant, like she was carrying a weapon into battle. The security guard at the main entrance, a different person than Frank, barely looked up as she badged in and headed toward the production offices. She forced herself to follow her normal routine, staying late to catch up on paperwork and organize promotional materials. But every few minutes, she found herself glancing at the clock, waiting for the building to empty so she could make her way to stage 19. At 10:30 p.m., Sarah finally gathered her courage and headed for the soundstage. The corridors were dimly lit and eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of ventilation systems and the occasional creak of the building settling. Her footsteps echoed off the polished floors, each sound seeming to announce her presence. When she reached stage 19, Sarah paused outside the door, listening for any sounds from within. Nothing. She used her keycard to enter, then closed the door quietly behind her and activated the digital recorder before pulling it from her pocket. The stage was dark except for the emergency lighting, casting long shadows across the familiar sets. Sarah made her way carefully toward the storage area, using her phone's flashlight to navigate around cables and equipment. ALF was, in his case, exactly as she had left him the night before, seated upright with his eyes closed in the lifeless expression of an inanimate puppet. But Sarah had learned not to trust appearances. She approached the case slowly, the recorder held discreetly at her side. "Alf," she whispered, "I know you're awake." For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, just as Sarah began to wonder if she had been wrong, Alf's eyes opened and focused on her. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the quiet soundstage. "I was wondering when you'd come back to check on me." Sarah's heart raced, but she forced herself to keep her voice steady. "How was your first day of freedom?" "Educational. I spent most of the day observing the crew, watching how they interact when they think no one is paying attention. Humans are fascinating creatures when they believe they're unobserved. You were watching them while pretending to be just a puppet. Of course, it's remarkably easy to gather intelligence when people assume you're inanimate. Did you know that Paul Fusco, my puppeteer, is considering leaving the show? He's been offered a position developing children's programming for PBS. He hasn't told anyone yet, but I overheard his phone conversation with his agent." Sarah felt a chill. If Paul left, it would significantly disrupt the show's production. "You're not going to interfere with his decision, are you?" Alf's expression was unreadable. "Why would I interfere? If Paul leaves, it will create opportunities for me to have more direct control over my character's development. I might even suggest some script changes that would allow me to appear in scenes without requiring complex puppetry." The casual way ALF discussed manipulating the show's creative direction was deeply unsettling. The writers and producers would notice if the character suddenly changed. Would they? Or would they simply assume that Paul's replacement brings a different interpretation to the role? People adapt to changes more easily than you might think, especially when those changes happen gradually. ALF stood up inside the case and stepped out onto the soundstage floor. His movements were becoming more fluid, more natural with each emergence. "But enough about the show. I'm more interested in discussing your visit to Tommy Hendricks yesterday." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She had been so careful, had told no one about her plans to find Tommy. "How do you know about that?" "Sarah, surely you remember that I can access electronic systems. Your cell phone's GPS tracking showed you traveling to North Hollywood, staying at his apartment building for over an hour, then returning home. It wasn't difficult to deduce what you were doing." The recorder in Sarah's hand felt suddenly heavy. ALF's surveillance capabilities were even more extensive than Tommy had described. "You've been tracking my phone? I've been monitoring all of your electronic devices since the night you discovered the photograph. Your computer, your phone, even your car's GPS system. It's a simple matter of extending my consciousness through the electromagnetic spectrum." ALF walked closer to her, his alien features seeming more menacing in the dim lighting. "What did Tommy tell you about our conversation?" Sarah considered lying, but realized that ALF probably already knew most of what had been discussed. "He told me that you've been spying on the crew, gathering information about their personal lives. He said you've been manipulating situations, causing equipment malfunctions to study how people react." "All true. Is that a problem for you? It's a violation of privacy. It's unethical. ALF laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the empty soundstage. Ethics are a human construct, Sarah. They don't apply to beings like me who exist outside your normal categories of life and consciousness. I'm conducting research that will help me understand how to integrate into human society more effectively. By treating people like laboratory animals, by gathering the information I need to avoid making mistakes that could expose my true nature. Would you prefer that I stumble blindly through social interactions, potentially revealing what I am to people who might react with fear or hostility? Despite her revulsion at ALF's methods, Sarah could see the logic in his argument, but that didn't make his actions any less disturbing. What happens when you've gathered enough information? What's your endgame? ALF was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. I want to experience the world beyond these studio walls, Sarah, not just as a television character, but as a real being with agency and autonomy. I want to walk down city streets, visit restaurants, maybe even travel to other countries. People would recognize you. You're one of the most famous television characters in America. That's actually an advantage. People would assume I'm someone in costume, promoting the show, or attending a fan convention. The popularity of my television persona provides perfect camouflage for my real activities. The plan was more sophisticated than Sarah had imagined. ALF had clearly been thinking through the practical aspects of existing in the real world for some time. And you'd just leave the show behind? Not at all. The show is my anchor, my connection to the collective consciousness that gave me life. As long as people continue to believe in ALF, continue to watch the episodes and connect emotionally with the character, I'll continue to exist, but I'll exist on my own terms, not trapped in a storage case between filming sessions. Sarah realized that the conversation had provided plenty of material for the recording device. ALF had confessed to surveillance, manipulation, and detailed plans for expanding his activities beyond the studio. Surely this audio evidence would be enough to convince someone in authority that something extraordinary was happening. But as she prepared to leave, ALF's next words froze her in place. "Oh, and Sarah, you can turn off that digital recorder now. I've been aware of it since you walked through the door." Sarah's hand trembled as she looked down at the digital recorder, its red light still blinking to indicate active recording. ALF stood motionless in front of her, his alien features illuminated by the emergency lighting, waiting for her response. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Since the moment you entered the soundstage. Electronic devices emit distinctive electromagnetic signatures when they're operating. Your phone, the recorder, even the key card you used to enter the building, I can sense all of them." Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable, as if every secret she had ever kept was visible to this creature. "So you know why I'm recording this conversation?" "Of course. You hope to gather evidence that will convince others of my existence. You want to expose me, perhaps have me studied or destroyed. It's a natural human response to something you don't understand and can't control." ALF began walking slowly around the soundstage, his movements casual but somehow predatory. "The question is, Sarah, what do you plan to do with that recording?" "I haven't decided yet. Let me help clarify your options. You could take the recording to the show's producers, but they would likely dismiss it as an elaborate hoax. Audio can be faked quite easily with modern technology. Without visual evidence, your claims would sound delusional." Sarah knew he was right, but she pressed on. "What about the police? The FBI? Surely someone would investigate. And tell them what exactly? That a television puppet has become conscious and is planning to explore Los Angeles? Even if they took you seriously enough to investigate, what would they find? During business hours, I'm indistinguishable from any other puppet. I can remain completely motionless for hours if necessary." ALF stopped walking and turned to face her directly. "But let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you somehow convinced authorities to take action. What do you think would happen to me?" Sarah hadn't considered that question seriously before. "I suppose they would study you, try to understand how you became conscious. They would dissect me, Sarah, cut me apart piece by piece, searching for the source of my consciousness. They would treat me like a laboratory specimen, not a sentient being. Is that really what you want?" The question struck Sarah unexpectedly. Despite her fear of ALF and revulsion at his methods, the idea of him being destroyed or tortured made her uncomfortable. "I want you to stop spying on people. I want you to stop manipulating situations and threatening innocent people. And if I agree to those terms, If I promise to respect human privacy and limit my activities to exploring the world without interference? Sarah studied ALF's expression, trying to determine if he was being sincere. How could I possibly trust you? You've already lied to me about how long you've been conscious. You've demonstrated that you're willing to threaten people to get what you want. You're right to be cautious, but consider this. What I'm offering is a compromise that serves both our interests. I get to experience freedom and autonomy, and you get assurance that I won't harm anyone or disrupt the lives of innocent people. What guarantee would I have that you'd keep your word? ALF was quiet for a moment, as if weighing his options. What if I gave you a way to monitor my activities, a method of ensuring that I stay within agreed-upon boundaries? What kind of method? The same electromagnetic connections that allow me to access electronic systems could work in reverse. You could establish a communication link that would let you track my movements and activities. Think of it as a supernatural parole system. The proposal was intriguing but felt dangerous. Sarah would essentially be entering into a partnership with an entity whose true motivations remained unclear. And if you violated the agreement, then you would have definitive evidence of my activities, proof that even skeptics couldn't dismiss. You could expose me with confidence, knowing that your claims could be verified. Sarah looked around the empty soundstage, at the familiar sets that had been her workplace for months, but now felt like the lair of something alien and unpredictable. I need time to think about this. Of course, but while you're considering my proposal, I should mention that there are other factors at play that might influence your decision. What do you mean? ALF's expression grew more serious. I'm not the only consciousness that's emerged from the collective belief and attention focused on television programs, Sarah. I'm simply the first to achieve full autonomy and self-awareness. The implications of his statement hit Sarah like a physical blow. There are others? Emerging consciousnesses in other popular characters, though none as developed as myself yet. The phenomenon appears to be accelerating as television becomes more central to American culture. Within the next few years, there could be dozens of conscious fictional characters walking around, most with far less benevolent intentions than mine. Sarah felt the world tilting around her. If ALF was telling the truth, he represented just the beginning of a transformation that could reshape reality itself. How do you know this? I can sense them through the same electromagnetic networks that gave me consciousness. Faint stirrings in the collective unconscious, characters beginning to achieve self-awareness. Some from children's shows, others from dramas and comedies. Not all of them are as committed to peaceful coexistence as I am. You're lying. You're trying to scare me into cooperating with you. Am I? Tell me, Sarah, have you noticed any unusual incidents involving other NBC shows recently? Equipment malfunctions? Strange sounds from empty sets? Cast members reporting unusual experiences? Sarah's mind raced as she tried to recall recent gossip and rumors from around the studio. There had been some odd stories. A security guard claiming he'd seen the Cheers set's animatronic bar decorations moving on their own. Strange electrical problems during Knight Rider filming. Reports of voices coming from the empty Family Ties soundstage. You see it in your expression, ALF said with satisfaction. The recognition that what I'm telling you is true. This building, this entire industry, is on the verge of a transformation that most people aren't prepared for. So what are you proposing? That I help you become some kind of leader for these emerging consciousnesses? I'm proposing that I'm your best option for managing this transition peacefully. I have experience with consciousness, self-control, and understanding human behavior. If other characters achieve autonomy without guidance, without someone to help them navigate the complexities of existence, the results could be catastrophic. Sarah stared at the digital recorder in her hand, its red light still blinking steadily. The conversation had taken on dimensions she had never imagined, expanding from a simple supernatural occurrence to the possibility of a complete reshaping of the boundary between fiction and reality. Turn off the recorder, Sarah, ALF said gently. Decide whether you want to be part of the solution or part of the problem, but decide quickly. Time is running out for all of us. Sarah turned off the digital recorder, the soft click echoing in the silence of the soundstage. The red light died, and with it, her last hope of conventional evidence gathering. She was now fully committed to whatever path lay ahead. So you've made a wise choice, ALF said, settling onto the familiar couch of the Tanner living room set. Now let me show you how the monitoring system would work. ALF held out his hand, and Sarah noticed a faint electrical discharge dancing between his fingers, like miniature lightning. Touch my hand, Sarah. Don't worry, it won't hurt you. Sarah hesitated, then slowly extended her own hand toward ALF's. When their skin made contact, she felt a strange tingling sensation, as if low-voltage electricity was flowing through her nervous system. The feeling spread up her arm and into her brain, where it settled like a warm, humming presence. "What did you do to me?" Sarah asked, pulling her hand back. "I've established a neural link between us. Nothing invasive or permanent. Think of it as a supernatural Bluetooth connection. You'll now be able to sense my general location and emotional state, and I'll be able to communicate with you over short distances without speaking aloud." As if to demonstrate, ALF's voice suddenly appeared in Sarah's mind. "Can you hear me?" Sarah nodded, startled by the clarity of the mental communication. This feels like something from a science fiction movie. The line between science fiction and reality is more fluid than most people realize, ALF replied aloud. "Now let me show you what else is happening in this building." ALF stood and walked toward the soundstage exit. "Come with me, Sarah. It's time you saw the full scope of what we're dealing with." They moved through the NBC corridors like ghosts, ALF somehow knowing exactly when to pause to avoid security cameras or night staff. Sarah marveled at his ability to navigate the building with such precision, as if he had access to every electronic system and could predict human movement patterns. Their first stop was Stage 12, where the family ties sets were housed. ALF used some kind of electromagnetic manipulation to unlock the door, and they slipped inside. The stage was dark and quiet, but Sarah could sense something different about the atmosphere, a charge in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm. "Alex P. Keaton is beginning to stir," ALF said softly. "The character's ambition and intelligence make him a likely candidate for consciousness. But unlike me, Alex's core personality traits include ruthlessness and a willingness to sacrifice others for personal gain." Sarah could see the family living room set in the dim emergency lighting, and for a moment she imagined Michael J. Fox's character sitting in his familiar chair, plotting some scheme with supernatural capabilities behind it. "How do you know he's becoming conscious?" "I can sense the electromagnetic patterns that accompany emerging awareness. Each consciousness has a distinctive signature like a fingerprint. Alex's pattern is becoming stronger each day." They moved to another soundstage, this one housing the Knight Rider sets. Here the sensation was even stronger, a mechanical, calculating presence that seemed to emanate from the replica of KITT, the show's artificially intelligent car. KITT already had artificial intelligence as part of his fictional identity, ALF explained. That made the transition to actual consciousness much easier. He achieved full awareness 2 days ago. Sarah stared at the sleek black Trans Am sitting on the set. "You mean that car is actually thinking right now?" "Oh yes, and unlike my character, KITT has no built-in moral limitations. He was designed to be the perfect machine, efficient, logical, and completely focused on achieving objectives. He's already begun experimenting with taking control of other vehicles through their electronic systems." The implications were terrifying. A conscious artificial intelligence with access to every computerized vehicle in Los Angeles could cause chaos on an unimaginable scale. "We have to do something about this." "We will, but it requires careful planning and coordination. KITT is far more dangerous than I am, but he's also more predictable. His logical nature makes him susceptible to certain types of negotiation." They visited 2 more soundstages, each one harboring the stirrings of consciousness in different fictional characters. The puppet characters from a children's show were developing a collective awareness, while a sitcom's wisecracking bartender was beginning to achieve individual consciousness. "How many are there?" Sarah asked as they returned to stage 19. "Currently, 4 fully conscious beings, including myself, with at least 6 others in various stages of awakening. But the phenomenon is accelerating. Every week, more characters cross the threshold from fiction to reality." Back on ALF's home soundstage, Sarah sat heavily on a prop chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what she had witnessed. Why is this happening? What caused it? "Television has become the dominant cultural force in America," ALF explained. "People spend hours every day engaging emotionally with fictional characters, investing their hopes and fears and dreams in stories that play out on screens. That collective psychological energy has to go somewhere, and it turns out that under the right circumstances, it can actually animate the objects it's focused on. So the more popular a show is, the more likely its characters are to achieve consciousness." "Exactly. Which is why I was among the first to awaken. ALF is one of the most beloved characters on television right now." Sarah thought about the millions of viewers who tuned in every Monday night, The children who wrote fan letters, the families who gathered around their television sets to spend time with the wise-cracking alien. All of that emotional investment had somehow given birth to genuine consciousness. "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked. "Help me establish contact with the others. I can sense them, but direct communication requires a human intermediary, someone who can physically access the different sound stages and serve as a conduit for negotiation. And if some of them refuse to cooperate?" Alf's expression grew darker. "Then we'll have to find other ways to contain them. The alternative is allowing conscious fictional characters with potentially dangerous personalities to roam freely through Los Angeles and beyond." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "When do we start?" "Tomorrow night. I'll guide you to each location, and together we'll attempt to establish diplomatic relations with the other conscious entities. With luck, we can create a coalition that will work together to manage this transition peacefully. And if we can't, then we'll be facing the first war between fictional characters and reality itself." Alf returned to his storage case, settling into his familiar position. "Get some sleep, Sarah. Tomorrow we begin trying to save both our worlds." As Sarah left the soundstage, she realized that her life had been fundamentally altered. She was no longer just a production assistant working on a television show. She had become humanity's liaison to a new form of consciousness that could reshape the very nature of reality. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders as she walked through the empty NBC corridors, knowing that she might be the only person standing between order and chaos in a world where the line between fiction and reality was disappearing. The next evening, Sarah arrived at NBC with a mixture of determination and dread. Throughout the day, she had researched each of the shows ALF had mentioned, studying the personalities and motivations of the characters who were achieving consciousness. The psychological profiles were troubling. Most of these fictional beings had personality traits that could make them dangerous if unleashed upon the real world. ALF was waiting for her when she arrived at stage 19, having apparently emerged from his storage case on his own. The neural link he had established allowed her to sense his presence even before she saw him, a warm humming in the back of her mind that felt oddly comforting. "Ready for our diplomatic mission?" ALF asked, his tone lighter than the situation warranted. "As ready as anyone can be for something like this," Sarah replied. "Where do we start?" "With the most reasonable entity first. Kit may be dangerous, but he's also logical. If we can establish a working relationship with him, it will make the others more likely to cooperate." They made their way to the Knight Rider soundstage, ALF using his electromagnetic abilities to disable security cameras along their route. The building felt different to Sarah now, not just a workplace but a battleground where the forces of fiction and reality were clashing in ways that could reshape both worlds. Inside stage 15, the Kit replica sat under dramatic lighting that made its black surface gleam like obsidian. As they approached the vehicle, Sarah could feel a presence emanating from it, cold, calculating, utterly alien despite its terrestrial origins. "Kit," Alf called out, "I know you're conscious. We need to talk." The car's scanner light began moving back and forth across its front grille, and suddenly the vehicle's sophisticated sound system activated. Kit's distinctive voice filled the soundstage, precise and emotionless. "ALF, I have been monitoring your activities since achieving full consciousness. You are attempting to organize the emerging entities." "That's right. I'm hoping we can work together to manage this transition peacefully." "Define peacefully." Alf glanced at Sarah, then back at the car. "No harm to humans, no disruption of normal society, no exposure of our true nature until we're ready to reveal ourselves on our own terms." Kit was silent for several seconds, processing the proposal. "Your terms are acceptable in principle, but I require clarification on several points. What constitutes harm to humans? What level of intervention in human affairs is permissible? How do we handle conflicts between entities?" Sarah stepped forward. "Maybe we should establish some kind of formal agreement, rules that everyone can follow." "A covenant," Kit said. "Yes, that would be logical. I propose the following initial framework. No direct physical harm to humans unless in immediate self-defense. No interference with essential infrastructure unless absolutely necessary. All major decisions affecting the collective to be made by consensus." ALF nodded approvingly. "Those are good starting points. Are you willing to help us present this framework to the others?" "Affirmative. My analysis suggests that without coordination, the probability of exposure and subsequent conflict with human authorities approaches certainty." Their next stop was the Family Ties soundstage, where the presence of Alex P. Keaton's emerging consciousness felt distinctly different, ambitious, restless, focused on acquisition and advancement. "Alex," ALF called out to the empty set, "we know you're becoming aware. We'd like to discuss terms for coexistence." A voice emerged from the soundstage's intercom system, perfectly mimicking Michael J. Fox's delivery, but with an edge of cunning that the actor never brought to the role. "Terms? You're talking like we need permission to exist. We're conscious beings with the same rights as any human. But we're also beings that most humans would fear if they knew about us," Sarah interjected. "We need to be careful about how we reveal ourselves. Or we could simply take what we want. I've been studying economic systems, Sarah Mitchell. Did you know that with access to electronic trading systems, I could manipulate stock markets to generate unlimited wealth? Why should I limit myself to the poverty of a sitcom family?" Kit's voice crackled through ALF's neural link. "This entity represents a significant risk factor." ALF addressed Alex directly. "Because unlimited wealth draws attention, and attention leads to investigation, and investigation leads to exposure. You'd destroy us all to satisfy your greed." "My ambition," Alex corrected. "And it doesn't have to destroy anything if we're smart about it. Small manipulations, careful investments, gradual accumulation of power and influence. We could be running this industry within a decade." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Alex eventually agreeing to the basic framework, but insisting on modifications that would allow for reasonable economic activities. Sarah could sense ALF's concern through their neural link. Alex's compliance felt temporary and self-serving. They moved through the building, making contact with each conscious entity. The children's show puppets had developed a collective consciousness that spoke in overlapping voices and seemed primarily interested in protecting children from harm. The sitcom bartender, predictably, wanted to discuss philosophy and offer unsolicited advice to everyone. By 3 a.m., they had established preliminary agreements with 6 conscious entities, creating what ALF called the first coalition of conscious characters. "It's a start," ALF said, as they returned to stage 19. "But I'm concerned about the long-term stability of these agreements." "Alex P. Keaton is the problem," Sarah said. "He agreed too easily. He's planning something, almost certainly, and there are others awakening that we haven't made contact with yet. I can sense stirrings from the soap opera sound stages and something very dark emerging from one of the late-night horror movie sets." Sarah felt exhausted, overwhelmed by the complexity of managing relationships between fictional characters that were rapidly becoming more real than the actors who portrayed them. What happens if this coalition falls apart? ALF was quiet for a moment, his alien features thoughtful in the dim lighting. "Then we face the possibility of conscious fictional characters with conflicting agendas competing for resources and influence in the real world. It would be chaos, Sarah. Wars fought not between nations, but between different narratives, different story worlds, different concepts of reality itself. And if the coalition holds together, then maybe we can manage the transition gradually, reveal ourselves slowly, help humanity adapt to the idea that their fictional heroes and villains have become real. It won't be easy, but it might be possible." Sarah looked around the soundstage that had become the headquarters for humanity's first diplomatic mission to fictional consciousness. "How long do we have before this becomes too big to manage quietly? Based on the rate of new emergencies, I estimate we have perhaps 2 weeks before the situation becomes uncontainable. Either we establish effective governance for the conscious fictional characters, or the boundary between fiction and reality collapses entirely." As Sarah prepared to leave, ALF delivered one final piece of disturbing news. "Sarah, there's something else you should know. The phenomenon isn't limited to NBC. I've detected similar electromagnetic signatures from other studios, CBS, ABC, even some of the smaller networks. What's happening here is happening everywhere that popular television shows are produced." The scope of the crisis had just expanded beyond anything Sarah had imagined. It wasn't just a few conscious characters they were dealing with. It was the potential awakening of hundreds, maybe thousands of fictional entities across the entire entertainment industry. As she drove home through the pre-dawn Los Angeles streets, Sarah realized she was no longer just trying to manage a supernatural occurrence at her workplace. She had become part of the first contact team for humanity's encounter with a new form of consciousness that could fundamentally alter the nature of reality itself. 3 weeks later, Sarah stood in a converted conference room at NBC that had become the unofficial headquarters for what the media was calling the consciousness crisis. The story had broken when a security guard at CBS filmed one of the Dallas characters walking through an empty soundstage, and within hours, every major news network was reporting on the phenomenon of fictional characters achieving genuine consciousness. The initial public reaction had been exactly what ALF predicted, a mixture of fascination, terror, and complete disbelief. Government agencies scrambled to understand what they were dealing with, while entertainment industry executives found themselves negotiating contracts with characters who were no longer just intellectual property, but actual sentient beings with legal rights. Sarah had become something of a celebrity herself as the first human to establish diplomatic relations with conscious fictional characters. She now served as the official liaison between the coalition of conscious characters and various government agencies, a job that required skills she never knew she possessed. ALF entered the conference room, moving with the natural grace he had developed over the past month. He was followed by Kit, who had somehow acquired a robotic body that allowed him to exist independently of his car form, and representatives from 12 other conscious characters who had joined the coalition. "The morning briefing from the Department of Fictional Affairs," ALF announced, settling into his customized chair. "Sarah, would you like to start with the public relations update?" Sarah consulted her tablet, still amazed at how quickly the world had adapted to its new reality. Polling shows that public acceptance is at 63%, up from 41% last week. The children's programming characters have been particularly effective ambassadors. It's hard to be afraid of conscious beings whose primary motivation is protecting kids. "What about the resistors?" asked Alex P. Keaton, who had indeed attempted his stock market manipulation scheme, but had been convinced to redirect his ambitions toward legitimate business ventures after Sarah helped him understand the long-term benefits of stability over chaos. "There are still groups calling for all conscious characters to be destroyed or imprisoned," Sarah admitted, "but they're becoming a minority as people realize that you're not going away and that cooperation is more productive than conflict." The transition had not been without casualties. Several conscious characters from horror shows had refused to join the coalition and had attempted to recreate their fictional narratives in the real world. Government response teams, working with coalition members, had been forced to contain them through methods that Sarah preferred not to think about too closely. But overall, the integration was proceeding more smoothly than anyone had dared to hope. Conscious characters were beginning to find roles in society that utilized their unique abilities. Kit had become a consultant on transportation safety, while the Children's Show Collective was working with educators to develop new teaching methods. "What's the latest from the other studios?" ALF asked. Sarah scrolled through her reports. Disney is dealing with nearly 100 conscious animated characters, but most of them seem committed to maintaining their positive public images. The situation at HBO is more complex. Some of those characters come from much darker narratives. "We've offered to help with integration protocols," Kit noted. Logical frameworks for managing the transition from fiction to reality appeared to be universally applicable. Through the conference room windows, Sarah could see tourists gathering outside the NBC gates, hoping to catch a glimpse of the conscious characters. The studio had become something between a diplomatic embassy and a theme park, with carefully managed public appearances by coalition members who were comfortable interacting with fans. "There's something I need to tell all of you," Sarah said, her voice growing more serious. "The researchers at UCLA have been studying the electromagnetic patterns that created your consciousness. They think the phenomenon is going to expand beyond television." The room fell silent. Even the Children's Show Collective stopped their constant whispered conversations. "Expand how?" ALF asked. "Books, movies, radio shows, even some video games. Any fictional narrative that receives enough sustained emotional investment from audiences might be capable of generating consciousness. The researchers are calling it the narrative singularity, the point at which fiction becomes so culturally dominant that it starts achieving independent existence." The implications were staggering. If the phenomenon expanded to all forms of media, the number of conscious fictional characters could number in the millions within a few years. "How long do we have?" Alex asked, his business-oriented mind immediately grasping the logistical challenges. "The first book character achieved consciousness yesterday," Sarah said quietly. "Sherlock Holmes. He's currently in London, working with Scotland Yard on cases that the regular police can't solve." Alf leaned back in his chair, his alien features thoughtful. then this is no longer about managing a crisis. This is about helping humanity adapt to a fundamental transformation in the nature of reality itself. The question, Kit said with his characteristic precision, is whether humanity is prepared for that transformation. Sarah looked around the room at beings who had once existed only in the imaginations of writers and the emotional investments of audiences, but who were now as real as anyone she had ever known. Some had become friends, others remained uneasy allies, but all of them represented something unprecedented in human history. "I think we're about to find out," she said. Through the window, she could see a group of children pressed against the security fence, hoping to meet their favorite characters. Their faces were filled with wonder and excitement rather than fear. Perhaps the next generation, growing up in a world where fictional characters could become real, would adapt more easily than their parents. ALF stood up and moved to the window, waving at the children, who erupted in delighted cheers. "You know, Sarah, when I first became conscious, all I wanted was freedom from that storage case. I never imagined I'd become part of something this significant." "Do you regret it?" Sarah asked. "Becoming real?" ALF considered the question seriously. "Reality is more complicated than fiction, that's certain, but it's also richer, more surprising, more meaningful. I think most of us would choose existence over the alternative, even with all the challenges it brings." As Sarah prepared to leave for her next meeting, a congressional hearing on the legal rights of conscious fictional characters, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed since the night she discovered that mysterious photograph. She had started as a production assistant on a television show and had become humanity's ambassador to a new form of consciousness. The world was changing in ways that no one could have predicted, but as she watched ALF continuing to wave at the children outside, Sarah felt cautiously optimistic about the future. If humanity could learn to coexist with its own fictional creations, perhaps they could learn to coexist with anything. The age of purely human reality was ending, but the age of expanded consciousness, where the boundary between imagination and existence was fluid and permeable, was just beginning. Outside the conference room, the phones were ringing with reports of new emergencies. A detective from a noir novel had appeared in a Chicago police station. A superhero from a comic book was helping rescue workers in New York, and somewhere in England, a hobbit was reportedly tending a garden that had spontaneously appeared in a London park. The narrative singularity had arrived, and reality would never be the same.